Hidden in the remote mountain valleys of Pakistan lives a population so genetically unique that scientists have spent decades trying to solve the mystery of who they really are. What they discovered didn't just rewrite history, it challenged everything we thought we knew about human migration and ancient civilizations. The Kalash people inhabit 3 isolated valleys in the Hindu Kush mountains of northern Pakistan. These 3 valleys, Bumbare, Birir, and Rumbur, sit nestled deep within one of the most remote and inhospitable regions on Earth. The Kalash population numbers only between 4,000 and 5,000 individuals, making them one of the smallest distinct ethnic populations in the world. Yet, despite their tiny numbers, they have become one of the most studied and scientifically significant populations on the planet. Their genetic makeup holds secrets about human migration, ancient civilizations, and the incredible resilience of isolated populations throughout history. For centuries, the Kalash have carried a compelling narrative within their community and culture. According to their oral traditions and historical accounts passed down through generations, they believed themselves to be direct descendants of Alexander the Great's soldiers. When Alexander the Great invaded the Indian subcontinent around 326 BCE with his massive armies, his legions swept through the region, conquering everything in their path. According to Kalash tradition, some of these Greek soldiers settled in the remote valleys where the Kalash now live. They intermarried with local populations, established families, and founded the civilization that would eventually become the Kalash people we know today. This narrative has been central to Kalash identity and cultural understanding for thousands of years. The Greek hypothesis seemed remarkably plausible to early observers and researchers. The Kalash possessed distinctive physical features that set them apart from neighboring South Asian populations. Many Kalash individuals have lighter skin tones and blue eyes, features more commonly associated with European populations. They practiced a unique polytheistic religion that appeared to blend ancient Hinduism with animism, rather than following Islam, which was practiced by most neighboring populations. Their spiritual beliefs and practices were entirely distinct from surrounding communities. The Kalash language contained vocabulary that resembled Greek words, further supporting the narrative of ancient Greek settlement. Even their customs, dress, and cultural practices seemed to suggest a distinct heritage separate from broader South Asian culture. To casual observers and early anthropologists, everything pointed convincingly toward that ancient Greek connection. However, science operates differently from observation and legend. Science requires evidence, data, and rigorous testing. When modern geneticists finally developed the technological capacity to test this centuries-old hypothesis at the molecular level, they decided to conduct the most comprehensive genetic analysis ever performed on the Kalash people. What emerged from this research would fundamentally challenge everything believed about Kalash origins and rewrite the historical narrative surrounding this mysterious population. The breakthrough came in 2015 with a landmark study published in the prestigious American Journal of Human Genetics. Researchers from multiple institutions, including the renowned Sanger Institute, gathered Kalash DNA samples and conducted detailed genomic analysis. They compared Kalash genetic material against published data from ancient populations, modern populations, distributed across the entire globe, and historical genetic records. Using cutting-edge SNP technology and high-coverage sequencing techniques, including the Illumina HiSeq 2000 platform, they genotyped 23 unrelated Kalash samples and sequenced one male individual at exceptional depth. The results were absolutely definitive and profoundly surprising. The first major discovery was unambiguous and shocking. There was no genetic support whatsoever for the Greek hypothesis. Previous studies using Y chromosome markers and mitochondrial DNA had hinted at this conclusion, but this comprehensive analysis confirmed it beyond any shadow of doubt. The Kalash were not descendants of Alexander the Great's soldiers. Their genetic makeup told an entirely different and far more ancient story. This finding contradicted centuries of cultural belief and overturned what seemed like compelling circumstantial evidence. The analysis revealed something far more remarkable and scientifically significant. The Kalash shared distinct genetic drift patterns with Paleolithic Siberian hunter-gatherers from extremely ancient times. This finding suggested that the Kalash might represent an extremely drifted and genetically isolated population descended from ancient northern Eurasian peoples. These were populations that had originally contributed genetic ancestry not just to modern Europeans, but also to populations of the Near East. What this groundbreaking finding meant was that the Kalash were living descendants of some of the earliest human populations to have migrated into the Indian subcontinent. These migrations had occurred thousands of years before Alexander the Great was even born. The Kalash connection was not to ancient Greece, but to ancient Siberia and the primordial human movements that populated Eurasia. The study calculated precise measurements of when this ancient divergence occurred. The mean time of divergence between the Kalash and other populations currently residing in their region was approximately 11,800 years ago. The confidence interval ranged between 10,600 and 12,600 years. Magnitude. They mean that the Kalash lineage split off from other South Asian populations during the early Neolithic period. This was a time when agriculture was just beginning to emerge in the Fertile Crescent. The Kalash had essentially maintained genetic isolation for longer than the entire span of recorded human civilization. They had been genetically separate from surrounding populations since before writing was invented, before cities were built, before organized religions emerged. Perhaps most astonishing was what researchers discovered about the Kalash's extraordinary genetic isolation. Since that split over 11,000 years ago, the Kalash had maintained a remarkably low long-term effective population size of between 2,300 and 2,600 individuals. More strikingly, genetic analysis found absolutely no detectable gene flow from their geographic neighbors in Pakistan or from any other extant Eurasian populations. This means that for nearly 12,000 years, despite living in a region that served as a major crossroads for trade, invasion, and migration, the famous Silk Road passed directly through their territory. The Kalash had remained completely genetically isolated. They had not intermarried with neighboring populations to any significant degree. They had not absorbed genetic material from outside groups. They had essentially preserved their ancient genetic makeup through an almost complete barrier to random mating with surrounding populations. This level of genetic isolation is extraordinarily rare and remarkable in human populations worldwide. Multiple factors contributed to this isolation. Geography obviously played a critical role. The Hindu Kush Mountains represent some of the most remote and inhospitable terrain on Earth. The valleys where the Kalash live are geographically cut off from surrounding regions, accessible only through extremely difficult mountain passes. Language served as another powerful barrier. The Kalash spoke their own unique Indo-European language that was understood only within their community and remained incomprehensible to neighboring populations. But perhaps most importantly, culture and religion functioned as barriers. The Kalash practiced a unique spiritual system combining elements of ancient Hinduism with animism and polytheistic beliefs. This religious system was fundamentally different from Islam, which was practiced by neighboring populations, and from other religions in the region. This cultural distinctiveness likely reinforced their social isolation and prevented extensive intermarriage with outside populations. However, the scientific story of Kalash genetics became significantly more complex in subsequent years. In 2016, another study by researchers, including Hellenthal and colleagues, suggested something different from the initial findings. They detected genetic evidence of DNA introgression in the Kalash population that appeared to date to between 900 and 220 BCE. This would place the admixture event right around the historical period of Alexander's invasion. This discovery created a genuine scientific debate. Did the Kalash have some recent Greek ancestry or not? Were there multiple waves of gene flow at different time periods? The apparent discrepancy between studies became a puzzle that geneticists continued to investigate intensively. Then, in 2021, another major study provided important clarification through detailed mitochondrial DNA analysis. Researchers examined the complete mitochondrial DNA control region from 111 Kalash individuals using high-throughput Sanger sequencing technology. They identified 14 different haplotypes and 8 distinct haplogroups within the Kalash population. The results were striking and conclusive. 98.8% of the Kalash's genetic ancestry was derived from West Eurasia, while only 0.9% came from South Asia. Neither African lineages nor East Asian genetic segments were detected among the tested Kalash samples. The most common haplogroups were H2A2A at 23.68% identified as West Eurasian in origin, followed by H4A1A and J1D3A, each representing 10.5%, and H2A3 at 9.21%. All these haplogroups pointed definitively to West Eurasian ancestry, confirming that the Kalash's maternal lineage traced back to Western regions rather than to Mediterranean or European Greek populations. The real scientific breakthrough arrived in May 2025, with the most comprehensive and detailed study yet conducted. Researchers from the Center of Excellence in Molecular Biology at the University of Punjab in Lahore conducted an extensive phylogenetic analysis of 98 male Kalash individuals using both autosomal STR markers and Y-chromosomal STR markers. This study represented the culmination of years of careful research and provided the most detailed picture yet of Kalash origins, genetic composition, and population history. The autosomal STR analysis revealed a truly remarkable finding. The Kalash population demonstrated a unique genetic structure that was distinctly different from Asians, Europeans, and Africans. When researchers performed principal component analysis and applied structure analysis clustering methods, the Kalash formed their own separate genetic cluster. They clustered independently from all other populations examined in the study. But this wasn't merely a matter of being different in degree. They were categorically distinct genetically from contemporary populations on multiple continents. The genetic data showed that the Kalash represented a unique branch of human genetic diversity that had diverged independently and maintained that distinctiveness through thousands of years of isolation. The Y chromosome analysis provided even more detailed information about the Kalash's paternal lineage and male ancestry patterns. Among the 52 unique haplotypes identified from analysis of 23 YSTR markers, the most prevalent haplogroup was R2's M479, accounting for 33% of the male population. This haplogroup carries tremendous historical significance because it is associated with ancient Neolithic migrations from Iran and is found predominantly in isolated tribal populations of South Asia, the Middle East, and to a lesser extent in Europe. The second most common haplogroups were GUA2 and J2B2A, each representing 19% of the Kalash male population. Each of these haplogroups tells an ancient story written in human genetics. The G2A2 haplogroup is frequently observed in the Caucasus region and moderately in populations from the Fertile Crescent, including Iran and Turkey. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that G2A2 appears in ancient Neolithic populations and is associated with early farmers who spread agricultural technology and farming practices across Europe and Asia beginning approximately 10,000 to 8,000 BCE. The J2Bu2A haplogroup is believed to have originated in the Fertile Crescent and subsequently spread to Europe and Asia through Neolithic farmer populations. This haplogroup remains predominant in Middle Eastern populations today. What is truly remarkable is that when researchers tallied all the Neolithic Y DNA clades among the Kalash, including R2, G2A2, J2B2A, and L1C, they accounted for 77% of the male population. If you include J2A1 in this calculation, this figure rises to 85%. This extraordinary concentration of Neolithic haplogroups suggested powerfully that the Kalash's male lineage was primarily composed of ancestry from early Neolithic farmers and herders who migrated from the Fertile Crescent into South and Central Asia during prehistoric times. The Kalash appeared to represent a living vestige of these ancient Neolithic populations, a population that had successfully escaped the later waves of Indo-Aryan invasions and admixture that had transformed most of South Asia. The presence of the R2M479 haplogroup is particularly telling and significant. This is a signature of Neolithic migration from Iran and suggests that the Kalash's ancestors likely arrived in their current location from the Iranian plateau or the broader Near Eastern region during the Neolithic period. This was thousands of years before the Bronze Age, thousands of years before the Indo-European invasions, and thousands of years before Alexander the Great. The Kalash were not Greek descendants at all. They were something far more ancient and scientifically more significant, living descendants of some of the earliest Neolithic populations to have migrated into the Indian subcontinent during the early agricultural revolution. The genetic research also provided valuable insights into the Kalash's relationship to other populations in their geographic region. When researchers compared the Kalash to neighboring Pakistani populations, including Pathans, Hazara, Kashmiri, Punjabi, and Sindhi populations, as well as to populations from other regions, including the Caucasus, Africa, East Asia, and Europe, they found consistently that the Kalash were genetically most distant from most other populations. The Euclidean genetic distance analysis showed that the Kalash had the highest genetic distance scores compared to all studied populations. This indicated that they were culturally and genetically distinct from all contemporary populations that researchers examined. This finding was powerfully reinforced by phylogenetic tree analysis using advanced computational methods. When researchers constructed evolutionary trees based on the genetic data, the Kalash appeared on a long, separate branch that diverged early in the tree and remained distinctly separate from all other populations. The remarkable length of this branch is particularly significant because longer branches in phylogenetic trees indicate greater genetic divergence and typically result from genetic drift, the accumulation of random genetic changes over time in an isolated population. This extreme branch length indicated that the Kalash had experienced tremendous genetic drift accumulated over thousands of years of isolation from other human populations. The researchers also noted something particularly interesting about the absence of gene flow. Tree mix analysis, which is specifically designed to detect migration events between populations, revealed no detectable recent admixture events between the Kalash and neighboring populations. This confirmed what earlier studies had suggested. The Kalash had maintained their genetic boundaries through cultural, linguistic, and geographic isolation. They had not intermarried with their neighbors to any meaningful degree in recent millennia. What's particularly fascinating is what this genetic isolation tells us about Kalash cultural persistence and achievement. The Kalash have maintained their unique religion, combining elements of ancient Hinduism with animism and polytheistic beliefs for thousands of years. They practice distinctive cultural rituals and festivals that have persisted relatively unchanged. They speak their own Indo-European language that is understood only within their community. Genetic evidence now confirms that this remarkable cultural distinctiveness has been accompanied by genetic distinctiveness. The Kalash have essentially been in a demographic and genetic bubble for 12,000 years, culturally, linguistically, and genetically separate from broader human populations surrounding them. The implications of these findings extend far beyond the Kalash themselves and impact our understanding of human history fundamentally. They provide a unique window into ancient human population movements and the processes of migration and admixture that have shaped human genetic diversity. The predominance of Neolithic haplogroups suggests that the Kalash represent an almost pure population descended from early agricultural populations of the Fertile Crescent. They apparently escaped the extensive genetic admixture that occurred during the Bronze Age, when Indo-European herders from the Eurasian steppes invaded and mixed with agricultural populations across Europe, the Middle East, and South Asia. Most modern populations today are complex mosaics of ancestry from multiple sources. The Kalash are profoundly different. They are predominantly descended from one ancient source that has remained remarkably unchanged. This realization prompted researchers to propose that the Kalash might represent a contemporary population that showcased the closest genetic similarity with a pre-Indo-Iranian Neolithic population of North Pakistan that had not experienced significant admixture with Paleolithic South Asians and had later escaped meaningful admixture from invading Indo-Aryans. In other words, the Kalash are living examples of what early Neolithic populations might have resembled genetically and demographically before the later waves of invasion and admixture that fundamentally transformed most of South Asia. The research also highlighted an interesting and paradoxical historical geographical fact. The Kalash live in a region historically linked to the Silk Road, one of the most important transcontinental trade networks in all of human history. Trade routes connected merchants, goods, and populations across Asia for thousands of years. The Silk Road brought ideas, religions, technologies, and genetic material across vast distances. Yet the Kalash remained genetically isolated despite living directly in this major cosmopolitan crossroads of commerce and cultural exchange. This speaks powerfully to the capacity of cultural and religious barriers to overcome and prevent the genetic mixing that trade and contact would otherwise facilitate. It's important to note that while recent comprehensive research has been absolutely definitive about ruling out significant Greek ancestry, earlier studies had detected some evidence of possible limited Greek admixture in other Pakistani populations. A 2002 study found ambiguous evidence of genetic admixture between Greeks and Kalash populations in some analyses, and other research has shown that Pakistani populations like Hazara and Pathan have male lineages that originated outside of Pakistan and share certain haplotypes with southeastern European populations from the Balkans region. However, autosomal analysis across multiple studies has consistently shown no significant evidence linking the Kalash or other Pakistani populations to Greeks. The most recent SNP-based investigations have definitively revealed that the Kalash population has distinctive allele frequencies that resulted from genetic drift rather than admixture with Greek or European populations. The 2025 study also made an important methodological point about the nature of genetic research and its limitations. The researchers noted that their analysis was based on a relatively small sample size, and that the limited geographic data from regions directly linked to Alexander's ancient empire constrained their ability to detect historical admixture events with complete certainty in every instance. However, the clear genetic distinctiveness of the Kalash from all other populations examined strongly supported the conclusion that they have been genetically isolated, and that any Greek admixture, if it occurred at all, was minimal and likely limited to specific rare individuals rather than reflecting a broader genetic contribution to the entire population. Looking toward the future, researchers emphasize the importance of conducting longitudinal studies to investigate the Kalash's migration patterns and the complex interplay between genetic and environmental factors influencing their health, adaptability, and well-being. They also called for comparative studies with other isolated populations worldwide to better understand how populations maintain genetic and cultural distinctiveness over thousands of years. The preservation of the Kalash cultural and genetic heritage has become a matter of significant concern for researchers and conservationists. The world is changing rapidly and continuously, and isolated populations like the Kalash are increasingly exposed to global influences. Modern transportation infrastructure, communication technologies, and economic integration are gradually breaking down the geographic and cultural barriers that have protected Kalash isolation for millennia. Understanding their genetics now, while this unique population still maintains relatively high levels of genetic distinctiveness, is crucial for understanding human population history and ancient migration patterns. The Kalash story also challenges us profoundly to reconsider what we think we know about history based on legend and physical appearance alone. For centuries, the Kalash believed and told the story of their Greek ancestry. Physical features like light skin and blue eyes seemed to support this compelling narrative convincingly. But genetics revealed a deeper, older, and more significant truth. The Kalash are not Greek, they are Neolithic, they are West Eurasian. They are remnants of ancient population movements that predate recorded history by thousands of years. This scientific revelation doesn't diminish the Kalash or their remarkable history. If anything, it makes them even more extraordinary and significant. They are not descendants of one of history's greatest military conquerors and leaders. They are something far older and arguably more scientifically and historically significant. They are living examples of populations that migrated into South Asia at the very dawn of agriculture and civilization, who established themselves in these mountain valleys, and who maintained their genetic and cultural identity through an astonishing span of human history. They watched empires rise and fall, religions spread and transform entire regions, and great trade routes connect the world, yet remained fundamentally unchanged and distinct. The Kalash story is ultimately a story about human resilience, cultural preservation, and the power of geography and isolation. It's a reminder that beneath the surface of our modern interconnected global world, there are still populations maintaining distinct genetic and cultural identities formed thousands of years ago. It demonstrates that science, when applied rigorously and comprehensively, can reveal profound truths about human history that surpass anything we might have imagined based on legend alone. The mystery of the Kalash has finally been solved, not by confirming ancient stories, but by discovering something far more ancient and scientifically profound: a direct genetic link to the earliest human populations who migrated into South Asia and established the foundation for all subsequent civilization in the region.